Hi, and welcome back to this series. We're now able to book some events, and we're displaying our bookings on the /bookings page. Not super beautiful, admittedly, but still, we can see our bookings. The general booking process works. We can send that request to the backend. In this video, we'll now make sure that this A looks a bit nicer, and B, that we can also cancel bookings. Because if we have a look at the schema we built thus far, we quickly see that there is one missing API endpoint, or one endpoint, this one here, which we don't use yet, cancel a booking. So let's implement all these features in this video. So let's make sure we can do something with this API endpoint and cancel a booked event. Now, for that, first of all, I want to work on this component here on this page visually, that this looks a bit nicer. And therefore, I'll go to my bookings.js file in the pages folder where I do render my bookings. And right now I just rendered this unordered list of list items without any special style. Now I do have components related to events here with my event list and so on. I will now also create a components folder which I'll name bookings. And in there, I want to have my booking list component. So basically, just as I have it in the events case, where I'll name it event list, booking list, I'll create a folder with that name and move that booking list JavaScript file into that folder. And in there, I want to output my my bookings, and then also render a button that allows me to cancel it. So for that, I'll first of all import React from React. And by the way, please note that due to the way our backend works, the bookings we're fetching here, right? This array of bookings here. If we have a look at our bookings resolver, there I currently do fetch all my bookings, not just the ones for this user. That is something we'll have to take into account, because at the moment when I log out and I log in with a totally different user which I created, and I go to bookings, then I see the same booking. So that's also something we'll have to take care about. But for now, back to that booking list component. I want to create a component that simply outputs my bookings. And therefore here I'll name this booking list, this constant here, which receives some props and which should return some JSX code. And I'll export this booking list component here as a default. Now in there, my goal is to render that unordered list of bookings. And for that, I will now basically assume that I do get my bookings in my props here. So on the props, I can access a bookings property, which should be there, and map that into an array of list items. So here in this function I pass to map, I get a single booking because this function runs for every element in the bookings array. And I then return my list item where I want to output some data about the booking. Now for that, let me go back to the bookings page down here. And there I basically access the event title and then the date. I will keep that logic, so we'll just copy that and move that into my booking list here. So let me output this in the list item so that we still have that, the booking title and the date. However, I'll wrap it into a div, and we'll move these two items in there. And then I'll create another div, which should actually give me that button to cancel a booking. So here, a button where I say cancel. Obviously, we'll have to add logic to only show that button if it is our booking, or alternatively, maybe better, on the back end, make sure that we only retrieve bookings for this user, which should be possible because if we have a quick look at our models again, in the booking model, we do store that user ID, so we would be able to narrow our bookings down by user. But that's a second step. For now, in a booking list component, I'm outputting these list items, and of course, these list items wouldn't have any styling. So I'll give that list item here a class name of a booking list item or anything like that, or just a booking item, whatever you like. Bookings item maybe. And in there, I'll then have my class name bookings item data. And here I'll have one bookings item actions. And of course, you can name these classes however you want. I use a BEM-like style, but this is totally up to you. Then I'll add my booking list CSS file, and in here, the goal, of course, is to style that all. And for that, my unordered list here will also receive a class name, of course, where I just say bookings list. So now we can use all these class names, bookings list, for example, and that would be my unordered list, where I want to set the list style to none to remove the bullet points, set the margin to 0 and the padding to 0. And then I also will target my booking item, so this class here, which simply is my list item, so booking item. And there you can, of course, come up with any style you want. I'll give it a margin of 1 rem or 0.5 rem, top and bottom, 0 left and right. Give it a padding of 0.5 rem in all directions and a border of 1 pixel solid. And then let me grab this purple color I also use in the main navigation and assign that to the border. Now every item, so this list item, will be a flexbox item. We'll use display flex because I want to distribute my child items, which are these two divs, across that full row of that item with justify content space between, which will ensure that the first div is all the way on the left and the other div is all the way on the right. And for vertical centering, I'll add a line items center here. Now for the bookings item actions, there I have a button. And of course, we did set up a global button style with that btn class. So I will recycle that class here and assign it here so that this button looks the way the other buttons look. For now, I'll not use these class names, so you could also remove them. Let me now save that and see how it works. But for that, of course, that booking list component needs to be included here in the bookings page. Let me first of all import the booking list component from components, bookings, booking list, and there from the booking list file. And then we can use that as a JSX element down there where I have this list at the moment. I throw in my booking list. Now there I need to pass that bookings property, and the value for this will be this state bookings, so the bookings are loaded. Now with that saved, if this reloads, we can log in to our app here and go to bookings. And we should see our list of bookings. We see something there, but not all styles are applied, which makes a lot of sense because obviously I need to import that CSS file into my booking list JavaScript file. Otherwise, these styles will not have any effect. So let's add that CSS import, and then let's give this another try. Here, when this loads, this now looks way better. Now, these are very large items, obviously. In the events, I have smaller items. We can shrink them down a little bit here as well. For the entire list here, I'll give this a width of, let's say, 40 rem with a max width of 90%. And then the margin here will actually be auto to left and right to center this list. And then now we should have a setup where this looks much nicer and the bookings now are nicely centered and smaller. Great. So the visuals are there. Let's now make sure that the cancel button does something. And for this in the booking list component, I will obviously add an on-click listener. Now we could handle that click inside of booking list. And for that, we would either have to use React hooks if you're using that version or convert it into a class-based component so that we can manipulate some internal state and so on and handle all these changes internally. But I don't want to do that. Instead, I'll just propagate this event up, so to say, to the component that includes the booking list component, which is our bookings page. And for that, I assume that on the props of this booking list component, I get a, let's say, on delete prop, and that in turn will point at a method that handles this delete case. Only important thing here, I want to pass the ID of the booking which gets deleted. And if we have a look at our schema, a booking, of course, has this underscore ID field, so we can pass this up as long as we are fetching it. And for this, if we have a look at our bookings page, there in this query, I am fetching the ID of my booking, so that should work. So in the booking list component, I can now add bind here. Because I don't want to execute the method right away with parentheses, that would execute it as soon as this code here is parsed, basically. That's not my goal. I will just set up a pointer at the function that should eventually be executed when a click occurs. And with bind, I can prepare the arguments that will then be passed into that function. The first argument always is what the this keyword in the called function will refer to. Doesn't really matter here because we're using this arrow function syntax everywhere, and therefore I can't change that anyways. But I will just set it to this here. More importantly is the second argument we add to bind, because that will be the first argument received in the function we call. And here I will pass in booking._ID. Right? We're inside of our map function here, so booking is passed in as an argument, and then I access the ID of that booking and I pass that to the onDelete method when it gets executed for this click listener on this button for this booking. So now with that in the booking list component, I have to pass that onDelete prop to the booking list. So here I add onDelete, and there I should now point at a method that executes when onDelete gets, well, fired. So here I'll have my delete booking handler, and I get the booking ID as an argument, right? We did set this up with bind. So in here, I now just need to prepare the request that should be sent. Let me also connect it down there. So here I will point at the delete booking handler. And with that, let's now write the logic to send a request up there. As I did before, I will simply copy that entire logic, and yes, as before, you could refactor this, of course. I just want to have really code snippets that speak for themselves in all the places, and we can then refactor it thereafter anyways. So in here, we first of all set loading to true, but then I don't set a query, I send a mutation, because if we have a look at our schema, cancel booking is of course a mutation. And it will also require an argument, and that is the booking ID. So in bookings.js, I send a mutation. The endpoint is cancel booking, right? So that's the name of the mutation you also see here. And as I mentioned, I need to provide my booking ID here, and that will actually be a string, and I can inject my booking ID I get as an argument there. Now, when I cancel a booking, if we have a look at our schema, I get back the event for the booking which I canceled. So here I will simply fetch the ID and the title, and that is it. So I'm not interested in other data for now. Then this gets sent to GraphQL, content type application JSON token gets attached, which is important. We're not able to interact with bookings if we don't have a valid token. And hence, the hope is that this works. Well, here, the data I handle, that of course won't work. Here I'm trying to update bookings with the data I fetched. Well, the data I'm fetching or I'm getting here, as I mentioned, is the event for the booking. So instead, here, I want to update my bookings indeed, because I deleted a booking, I canceled one. But we got two options now. I could again fetch all bookings. This will be an extra round trip, which we might not need here. Instead, when I set my state here, I can use the function form of setState, where I get the previous state as an argument. And then I get my updated bookings, where I simply take the previous state bookings. So the bookings are previously loaded. And I copy those with the spread operator. And now in updated bookings, I want to delete the booking for which we got the booking ID here. And actually, now that I think about it, there is even a smarter way. We don't need to clone that. We can just access previous state bookings and then use the filter method. And this allows us to basically create a new array. Filter gives you back a new array, which contains all items for which this function we pass to filter returns true. This function will run for every element in the array here, so in the bookings array. And then when we return true, this element is kept. When we return false, it's filtered out. Now we want to filter out that single booking that was canceled. So I will return true if the ID of the booking we're looking at is not equal to the ID of the booking we tried to delete, because that is that single booking I want to remove. So here I'll compare booking underscore ID, and I will keep it if that is not equal to the booking ID I'm getting as an argument. And then I can return an object which will be merged with my existing state, where my bookings are equal to the updated bookings, so to this filtered array, and where isLoading is set to false because I'm not loading anymore. And with that, let's open our console to see any errors if we got any. And let's log into this application. Go to bookings. And well, first of all, that is something I should fix. Here, when we use map, we should assign a unique key with the key prop here. And there I can just use booking ID in my booking list JS files. Let's quickly fix that. Booking ID assigned to key here on the list item. Now let me log in again real quick. And now here on the bookings page, let's try canceling one. Doesn't look too bad. Now, is it really gone? Let's explore the network tab. Because remember, the fact that we don't see it here is simply related to the fact that I'm filtering it out manually with that filtering method here in the then block after sending the request. But I'm still positive that it worked. If we have a look, this is the request we sent. There we see that we sent a mutation to cancel booking. And in the response, I didn't get an error. Instead here, I got my event title and ID. So that seemed to work. And we can, of course, also confirm this by reloading and logging in again. If we go to bookings again, we see there are only 2 bookings now. So it really was deleted from the database. Perfect. So this works. We got a nicer user interface, and we're now able to delete our bookings. Problem that remains is that we can also delete bookings that aren't ours, so that weren't made by this user. And this is something we can fix on the back end here in the bookings resolver. Currently, I'm retrieving all bookings here. Now, the solution is to add a filter here on the back end. And this is now not the filter we used before on the JavaScript array. This instead is a MongoDB filter now. I can pass an object, a JavaScript object to find, and then define a filter criteria there that will be taken into account when it tries to find entries for my bookings. And I have a very simple condition here. I want to find bookings where user, and for that, let's have a quick look at the booking model again. We got that user thing here. And that in the end is just an object ID. So where that user field here is equal to the user ID of the logged in user. Now here on request, I get the information whether the user is authenticated. If we have a look at the isAuth middleware, we see that I store the user ID there as well though. So I can just compare user in my database, in my bookings, to request user ID. Right? Because I'm creating that user ID property on my request object in my auth middleware. And this should now, on the server side, narrow down the bookings I can fetch. So if I log back in here, and I go to bookings, I see 2 bookings, because probably this user created them. Let me log in with another user I created earlier in this series. And there I got no bookings. Now with this user, let me view the details of another test and book that event. And now I see that booking for another test here on this test2@test.com user. And if I now log in with test@test.com again, so with that other user, there under bookings, I don't see that another test. So now we really only fetch the bookings we have for that user, and we therefore can only cancel our own bookings, which of course is what we want. This is it for the bookings. Now, obviously, there's more you can do. For example, if you cancel all, you have that blank page. You maybe want to show some message there. And in general, you can always add more functionalities. The next thing I want to do, though, is I want to optimize our API a bit. Because right now we have a lot of round trips, actually. And I will explain what exactly I mean with that in the next video when we'll also fix it.